Welcome. My name is Terence Maloon. This is Lecture 3 in the series, The 50 Years That Changed Painting. This lecture is about Monet and Cézanne and the abstraction of light. I'd like to thank the ANU Drill Hall Gallery for organizing this lecture series, and also Andrew Dyer and Donna Marie Kelly, who have generously sponsored this lecture series and its transfer online. One of the most revelatory exhibits in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, you see it here, is the so-called May triptych. Ernest May was a financier who began acquiring Impressionist paintings around 1880. He and his wife appear in a couple of works by Degas, and Degas may have been his conduit into the Impressionist world. It was Ernest May's idea to bracket these works together. The paintings are not exactly the same size. The one in the middle is smaller and squarer in format, yet they were all painted in 1872, and the locations where they were painted were quite close to each other, west of Paris, along the course of the river Seine. Hence, a similar light, a similar tonality that they share. If you want a more technical explanation of their similarity, the range of colors constituting the artist's palette is well-nigh identical in each case. There's no visible divergence, no crimson red, for example, no Prussian blue, no cadmium yellow appearing where it might clash and break ranks with the neighboring paintings. Nor is there any apparent difference in handling, in style, in the notation of the paintings. They are painted with brushes of the same gauge or the same range of gauges, juxtaposing those gorgeous, broad, pale skies, palpitating with light, and the more granular textures and delicately trembling lines that complete the composition. In fact, these are works by three different artists: Sisley on the left, Pissarro in the middle, Monet on the right. Ernest May's decision to bracket them together compels us to marvel at their stylistic convergence and commonality. But how do we account for this? What are the circumstances that lay behind this extraordinary phenomenon? What were the assumptions the artist held in common? How and why did they arrive at a common idiom? If the tenor of the time put such great emphasis on individualism and originality, why weren't the artists anxious or reactive when their works in 1872 looked so very much alike? This lecture should principally be about Monet and Cézanne, but the relationship between Monet and Cézanne is very significantly mediated by Pissarro, who was an extremely important figure in the art of his time, even though, from the particular perspective of this lecture series, he is not as vital a link in the evolution of abstract art, whereas Monet and Cézanne certainly were. Likewise, Renoir and Sisley, who are not so vital to our narrative. These are self-portraits by Monet and Pissarro. Pissarro was the oldest artist associated with the Impressionist group. He was even a couple of years older than Manet and Whistler, whom we tend to think of more as precursors or, in some sense, fellow travelers of the Impressionists. Born in 1830, Pissarro was 4 years older than Degas, 9 years older than Sisley and Cézanne, 10 years older than Mary Cassatt, 11 years older than Berthe Morisot, 18 years older than Gauguin, 29 years older than Seurat, 33 years older than Signac, 39 years older than Matisse. Why mention all these names? It isn't random at all. All of these artists had vital connections with Pissarro at one time or another. He was the most extensively and intensively connected and engaged member of the Impressionist group. Indeed, he was the only artist who exhibited in all 8 of the historic Impressionist exhibitions held between 1874 and 1886. Cézanne referred to him as the humble and colossal Pissarro and said, "He was a father to me, a man to consult, something like the good Lord." Cézanne wasn't alone in the love and reverence that he bore towards Pissarro. When we come to terms with the poetics of Impressionism, we're compelled to think of fields, all kinds of fields. The field of vision, open fields in the country, broad sheets of water, fields of light, and in this respect, you could venture to say that Pissarro exerted or was an especially powerful quantum field that attracted a good deal of trust and solidarity among his contemporaries. It was Pissarro and Monet who were the co-organizers of the first Impressionist exhibition held in 1874, 2 years after the paintings in the May triptych were done. But before we get to that fateful year of 1874 and that epoch-making exhibition, we have the unanswered question how and why the paintings in the May triptych came to look so alike. As I said, the motives for the paintings in the May triptych were not very far apart from each other. Here you see their locations on the map. Sisley's painting spot marked with a yellow asterisk, Monet's with a white asterisk, Pissarro's with a red asterisk. By 1872, and in fact long before that date, there were railway links attaching those suburban or still semi-rural places to Paris. And the River Seine, which snakes its way through all of them, was another vital connection. As you will discover, I hope, territory, locality, provides a very fruitful way of understanding the advent of Impressionism, helping us to understand the artist's strategic choices, not just aesthetic choices, but also their economic, philosophical, and political alignments. But first of all, we have to note their earliest convergence in Paris in the 1860s, a good 10 years or more before the first Impressionist exhibition took place. Monet, Renoir, and Sisley, and Whistler too, all received instruction from the academician Charles Blair. At some early point, all of them would have been pursuing the conventional career path, preparing to be accepted as students of the École des Beaux-Arts. Here you see a group of students from the École des Beaux-Arts. But the bar set for entry into the École des Beaux-Arts was very high indeed. And the criteria, well, let's just say that these young, relatively free-spirited and independent-minded artists couldn't find the good faith and perseverance to clear this particular hurdle. whether or not they actually had the aptitude to become painters of the ilk of Bouguereau, for example, Bouguereau being by far the most successful living artist in France in the 1860s and beyond. Monet remembered Gleyre telling his students, "I want you to remember that when one draws a figure, one should always think of the antique. Nature is all right as an element of study, but it offers no interest. Style, you see, is everything." This painting by Bouguereau could be considered a touchstone of style by the majority of aspiring artists. When Cézanne arrived in Paris for the first time in 1861, he went to see the Salon exhibition, which dazzled him, and from his remarks, it is evident that his taste was still completely unformed. His sense of direction, completely unclear, his sense of his own aptitude, of his innate sensibility and moral character and technical abilities were quite undeveloped and unrealistic. In the Salon exhibition, he reported to a friend in Aix, "What you have is truly the best in the Salon because all tastes, all the genres meet and collide with one another." The minutely detailed paintings of Bouguereau and in particular here by Meissonier, Cézanne found magnificent, along with works by other academicians like Gérôme and Cabanal, which he also admired. But subsequent to this was a dawning realization that he would have to propel himself into this milieu, that he would have to meet its professional requirements and would have to hold his own in such company. And this naturally exposed his inadequacies and brought out a vehement contrarian reaction. It's perfectly understandable, of course, and Cézanne wasn't alone in this. Soon he would be railing away at what he contemptuously called the Salon of Bouguereau, and would be submitting paintings that were deliberately unacceptable, offensive, subversive of its conventions and professional requirements. In 1865, Cézanne wrote to Pissarro telling him that he was preparing to submit some paintings to the Salon that would make the Institute redden with rage and despair. But Cézanne had come to Paris probably with the same naive aspirations as some of his Impressionist peers. They were all aiming to gain admission to the École des Beaux-Arts. Cézanne attempted the entrance examinations twice, but he failed on both occasions. So rather than enrolling for private tuition by an established academic master to coach him for the entrance examination, Cézanne opted instead to work things out for himself, attending unsupervised life drawing sessions at the Atelier Suisse, also known as the Académie Suisse. The Académie Suisse was a venerable institution in Paris, founded in 1815 by Martin François Suisse, whom you see here in a portrait by Courbet. Located on the Ile de la Cité, right in the center of Paris, the Académie Suisse can be pinpointed in this little painting on the left by Corot, just behind that small red building. Over the years, Ingres, Delacroix, Daumier, Géricault, Corot, Courbet, Manet, plus many moderately successful academicians, had come to do life drawing here to keep their hand in, so to speak. It was in Suisse's establishment that artists who became the core of the Impressionist group first established their ties of friendship. According to the art historian John Rayvold, there was a group of them from the Académie Suisse that even exhibited in the Salon des Refusés in 1863, even though they weren't listed in the exhibition handbook. Bouguereau we mentioned before, and these are two of his drawings, which we can assume represent the gold standard in academic draftsmanship. Remember how Gleyre had counseled his students, as reported by Monet, when one draws a figure, one should always think of the antique. Nature is all right as an element of study, but it offers no interest. Style, you see, is everything. The drawing on the left is the most pitifully bungled to survive from Cézanne's time at the Académie Suisse, and apart from anything else, you will grasp its strangeness and shock value to his fellow life-drawing students. He was the laughingstock of the Académie Suisse, Pissarro remembered, especially among the academically oriented students. But Pissarro didn't laugh, nor, one supposes, did the others who befriended Cézanne at around this time. Guillaumin, Monet, most notably. His detractors called him a mouton à cinq pattes, a sheep with 5 legs, that is to say, a freak. But there was something about the incorrigible clumsiness and persistent misproportion in Cézanne's drawings which engaged you and held your interest, and so much more so in comparison with the slick, formulaic performances by the more accomplished students moonlighting from the École des Beaux-Arts. Uncouth and error-prone as these drawings were, there was an intensity, a directness, a courage, an honesty in their approach, which were the characteristics of Cézanne himself when you got to know him, as they eventually did. Paintings he produced at this time were as naive, eccentric, and cack-handed as his drawings, even more so maybe, but with very limited technique at his disposal, he could accomplish paintings like this by around 1866, from a series of portraits of his uncle Dominique, his mother's brother, startlingly good already, masterful, even if few at the time were able to appreciate their sterling qualities. The irregulars of Gleyre's studio and the riffraff of the Académie Suisse were diverted from academic goals not just by an interest in landscape painting, but by their incredible aptitude, their phenomenal talent for it. They fell under the thrall of these pioneering plein airists, Courbet, Boudin, and Corot. Daubigny was another important predecessor. The acolytes of Courbet, notably Monet, Pissarro, Sisley, Basile, ventured into the forest of Fontainebleau, the stamping ground of the landscapists of the Barbizon school. Boudin recognized Monet's precocious talent when Monet was a teenager and initiated him into plein air painting, which would have been quite daunting and demoralizing, if not devastating to the older artist, you would think. This is what Monet was capable of as an 18-year-old. Corot was the purest, the most prolific, undoubtedly the best plein airist of them all, and all of the Impressionists would have agreed on this point. But his plein air studies and the paintings he made public in the salons were strikingly different from each other, as his most devoted admirers were very well aware. Pissarro, Sisley, Armand Guillaumin, Berthe Morisot, and her sister Edma all received tuition from Corot, and all acknowledged at one time or another in print that they had been his pupils. Well, you can see the great resemblance here, the very evident debt to Corot, Pissarro at the top left, Sisley on the bottom right, Corot bottom left. In 1855, soon after he arrived in Paris, Pissarro visited the Salon exhibition, where he encountered Corot's paintings for the first time. This was his reminiscence of that fateful encounter and of the conclusions he drew from the experience. One can make beautiful things with so little. Motifs that are too beautiful end up looking theatrical. Think of Switzerland. Old Corot made lovely things at Gisors, 2 willows and a little bit of water, a bridge. Like the picture in the Universal Exhibition, what a masterpiece. Happy are those who see beautiful things in modest places where others see nothing. Everything is beautiful. The whole thing is knowing how to interpret. Hence, Pissarro's realization that you could imbue a minimally interesting motif with the rarest artistic qualities. This realization marks a giant step away from academicism, of course, and a giant step towards what we would come to know as Impressionism. Apparently, there were 5 paintings by Corot in the Universal Exhibition, and if I'm not mistaken, 4 of these can be seen in the Musée d'Orsay's collection. Here they are. Admittedly, it's hard to square them with Pissarro's recollection. Maybe this one fits his description a bit better than the others. However, it's understandable that at the time, one might have been struck by the fact that Corot's exquisite painterly interpretation could serve to completely transform and redeem an insignificant landscape subject. Corot's biographer, Gustave Geoffroy, got to describe the key to Corot's approach not only to plein air painting, but to painting in general. He described his modus operandi, which, as we shall see, became fundamental to the Impressionist technique. And I quote, "All the time Corot spends at his easel," Geoffroy wrote, "whether alone or in conversation, he is preoccupied above all with the accords, with the harmonies between things, which he notices everywhere, which he noted down yesterday and will go on accumulating today. This term, accords, keeps on cropping up in reference to Corot, as does its synonym rapport in the plural. So we can assume that it was the linchpin of how Corot taught. He taught his students not only how to paint, but how to see and to paint accords and rapport. And to remind you once again, Pissarro, Sisley, Guillaumin, and Bert Morisot, who participated in the first Impressionist exhibition, all received tuition from Corot. And through their intense interaction with others in the group, Corot's way of painting, his way of seeing, became their common culture, pretty much. To drive this point home, Monet, who seems never to have had any direct connection with Corot, was moved to say, late in life, in tribute to Corot, "There is only one master, Corot. We are nothing by comparison." Pissarro, when he was interviewed by a journalist late in life in Le Havre, told the journalist the following: "I see only spots." His word was tash, which is an important word for our purposes in this lecture series. "When I begin a painting, the first thing I try to fix is the accord. Between the sky, this land, and this water, there is necessarily a relationship. It can only be a relationship of accords, and therein lies the great difficulty of painting. The great problem to solve is to bring everything, even the smallest details, into the harmony of the whole, that is to say, into the accord." So here you have a notion of a painting successively built up of accords until it achieves a totality of accord. The pleinairist's approach is to analyze the motif for color and tone, to break it down into spots, patches. The word they use is tash, and we're going to encounter this word frequently from now on, tash. The Impressionist painter's determination to link the background to the foreground, up and down, left and right, saturating the composition with accords, had the effect of breaking down conventional distinctions and hierarchies, and appeared to level their compositions. This feature greatly disconcerted the early viewers of Impressionism, as was evidenced in the famous rebuke of a painting by Pissarro in the first Impressionist exhibition. I quote, "It has neither head nor tail, top nor bottom, foreground nor background," unquote. These idiosyncratic features, which the critic Louis Leroy observed in 1874, you can see persisting a good 26 years later in Pissarro's late masterpiece, The Wash House at Bazincourt, painted in 1900. To be perfectly clear about this, it was their common attraction to plein air painting and their great aptitude for it that drew Monet, Pissarro, Sisley, Renoir, and other soon-to-be Impressionists together. However, there was a massive problem, a curse, if you will, on their endeavors from the very start, and that was because the Academy and its public showcase, the Salon exhibitions, maintained an ironclad control and monopoly over contemporary art. What was considered fit to be shown, what was considered not fit to be shown, was entirely determined by the Academy. Plein air paintings by Corot, which the younger generation would have idolized, could never be shown in the Salon exhibitions, and were not even recognized as legitimate works of art. They were sketches, studies, copies of nature, not autonomous inventions. They had no style. They were too informal and accidental looking to be considered as serious creations. There was not a hope in hell that plein air paintings that Monet produced in the 1860s, such as this painting here, could pass muster with the Salon's vetting committee. The naive, childish way the fishermen were represented would be disqualification enough. And here, in this other Dazzler by Monet, were all the signs of haste and improvisation, making things up as you went along, seizing a fleeting effect rather than aiming for something stable and permanent. Pissarro had better luck in getting his landscapes accepted into the salons, but he too had his share of knockbacks and frustrations. But these paintings of his were accepted into the salons of 1866 and 1867, where they raised considerable interest, even among critics disposed not to like this sort of thing, who had never seen anything quite like it before, and were genuinely impressed by the forcefulness and originality of Pissarro's talent. But there were the devastating knockbacks, not just of one's own works, but by one's friends and colleagues, whom one admired and respected, almost everyone experiencing chronic difficulties of making a livelihood, so that one by one the artists decided to decamp and remove themselves from Paris and its rat race art world, and to rely on each other to stimulate, inspire, challenge, educate, and support. And this is where they chose to settle, less than 20 kilometers from Paris. Even though the villages or hamlets had different names, Bougival, Louveciennes, Marly, Voisin, they are amalgamated together in a single district. Those wiggly yellow and dark blue and red lines on the map will give you a sense of how close everything is. These are recommended walking routes for tourists who want to explore the so-called cradle of Impressionism. Renoir's mum and dad lived in the village of Voisin. Their house's location is shown by a blue asterisk. Monet found a house in the hamlet of Saint-Michel on the hill above Bougival, shown with the white asterisk, and Pissarro rented part of a house in Louveciennes, shown by the red asterisk. Over the time that they were living in such close proximity to each other, they painted the same motifs, sometimes separately, sometimes in each other's company, and constantly showed their work to one another. There would also have been artist friends dropping in from Paris, and one imagines these friends being shared around as well and showed all the artist's recent work. A railway line links Bougival, Louveciennes, and Marly to the Gare Saint-Lazare, to the bustling hub of the 9th arrondissement of Paris. Even on a slow train, you would have made less than an hour's journey straight into the liveliest part of the city. And on your return, sanity, simplicity, rural tranquility. Here, Renoir and Pissarro planted their easels at virtually the same spot, but not at the same time. In the Renoir painting, it's summer, and in the Pissarro painting, it's spring. Which of the paintings was done first is anyone's guess, but the differences are very telling. Pissarro's landscape is topographical, whereas Renoir's is not. The landmarks, the aqueduct in the distance, the cluster of houses, the bridge or the retaining wall are dutifully noted by Pissarro, whose fealty is to the tradition of naturalism and realism, which was unshakable. With his acute sense of aerial perspective, all of the pieces and patches of color and tone, all the tash, seem to fall into place. On the right-hand side of the road, there's a sequence of puffs of khaki color, a dull greenish gray-brown, a sequence of patches has the same basic color, but they're all minutely differentiated and fall effortlessly into place within the spatial prospect. Renoir, on the other hand, is not at all interested in topography. He's not interested in realism. He's not interested in naturalism. He remembers the landscapes of pleasure painted in the 18th century and provides a modernized version of those idyls. Renoir's landscape is populated by easy, affluent strollers, whereas Pissarro is consistently and categorically class-conscious. The landscape belongs to the rural workers, the smallholder farming families who are still in a majority in this locality. As is the case in Corot's paintings, Pissarro exercises a selective focus, pulling some aspects into sharp detail, letting others melt and blur. Whereas Renoir's entire picture is out of focus. There's no detail that breaks ranks that you can latch onto separately. But the paradox is that once the figuration slips out of focus like this, the physical actuality of the painted surface is accentuated, as is so clearly evident here, where textures, colors of the palette, individual brushstrokes have become the salient thing. Along this same road, going in the same direction, Renoir and Pissarro would make their way home. Renoir turning to the right before the aqueduct, Pissarro turning to the left. Pissarro rented part of this house, and in so doing, hallowed the street and the surrounding areas, which provided great landmarks, great points of recognition within the history of 19th century painting. If you love Impressionist painting, this really is sacred ground. That's an antique postcard on the right showing Pissarro's house on the left-hand side of the street. There are many paintings whose vantage point is virtually at the doorstep of this house, and the paintings span from 1869 to 1872. Consequently, from them, we get a sense of how an Impressionist idiom evolved and how the gradual reform of the artist's palette occurred. Before Impressionism got its name, it was known as la peinture claire, light painting, painting that no longer relied on tonal contrasts, that substituted warm and cool colors for the dark and light contrasts of traditional European painting. Until you've got your bearings on this street, you can't ascertain whether paintings which may on the face of it seem disparate are in fact vitally related through the circumstances of their creation. For example, that these two paintings are views of the same street. And here too, paintings which have been painted from different sides of the road. Then there's another pair looking in opposite directions. One pair painted from the same side of the street. One was painted by Monet, one was painted by Pissarro. As you can see, they're not easy to tell apart. All of them were painted where the red asterisk is, virtually on Pissarro's doorstep. Another spectacular combustion of collaborative or competitive energy occurred at the site of the black asterisk, a place no longer in existence, called La Grenouillère, the frog pond, which was where Monet and Renoir set up their easels side by side in 1869. La Grenouillère was a pleasure spot on the Seine, popular with Parisians who could access it by train. Unlike anywhere in the Anglo-Saxon world, the bathing establishment here was unsegregated. In Monet's bravura rendition on the right, you can see both men and women in and out of the water. The painting on the left is by Renoir. The circular island where this attractive, fashionable crowd is gathered was known as Le Camembert for obvious reasons. It's linked to the riverbank and to the floating restaurant, which was called a café bal, a cafe dance hall, which you see on the right. And here on the right, Monet's rendition of the same scene. The floating café bal had alongside it an adjoining boat offering cabines, that is to say, changing rooms. Both boats burnt down, yet La Grenouillère continued to attract a holiday crowd until the dawn of the 20th century. Having lost its function, the Camembert languished. Then the Seine was dredged in the 20th century, and the water level sank so that Le Camembert found itself as part of a new embankment where it remains to this day. From hints in a contemporaneous letter by Monet, we can infer that both he and Renoir thought they could use their outdoor studies of La Grenouillère. There were 6 of these, 3 by each artist, as the basis of larger, more deliberately formalized, more carefully worked, more finished paintings done in their studios that they might submit to the Salon. As for these studies, they were otherwise virtually useless. Nobody wanted paintings that looked like this. They were not even considered real paintings, just sketches and ancillary preparation. That winter, Monet and his family were unable to keep warm. They couldn't afford to buy firewood. And for a couple of weeks, they've moved in with Pissarro and his family in Louveciennes. That degree of hardship wasn't uncommon. And then, in July 1870, their lives were disrupted. War broke out between France and Prussia, and by September, Paris was surrounded and under siege. The heights of Marly, which overlooked Paris, were occupied by Prussian heavy artillery emplacements, and the large house where Pissarro's family had lived became a barracks for Prussian soldiers. The Pissarro family were able to get away in time. They took refuge in London, and there Pissarro met up with Monet again. They visited museums together, went painting together in the parks, and Monet caught up with his old acquaintance, Whistler. It was the first time for both of them in London, and the most impactful event was their discovery of Turner's paintings. The dazzlement of Turner, I can only guess at this, provided the last step towards the stylistic convergence documented by the May triptych. Sisley, the third painter, needed no introduction to Turner's paintings. His family was English, and they went back and forth between London and Paris. As a British citizen, Sisley wasn't eligible for subscription, so he was able to remain in France during the Franco-Prussian War, but more of this anon. Turner's paintings were spectacularly light and spacey. They were great feats of aerial perspective. For the Impressionist landscape painters, as no doubt for Whistler as well, they conveyed the intimation of non-objective painting because in them, especially in some of Turner's late paintings, there is so little of an object to latch onto. Everything is inundated by an all-pervasive radiance, its whiteness refracting into shimmering iridescence. This is not a static universe, but a universe in flux. Turner's are the first modern paintings to harness time as their subject, to represent time's transformative power. Monet and Pissarro were duly amazed. They would have been able to see some of Turner's watercolors in London as well. So the pale tonality, the blends of prismatic color that give such an elusive and mysteriously iridescent quality to the Impressionist palette, those features had been arrived at individually and collectively before they encountered Turner, but now they were vindicated and emboldened by the brilliant precedents set by Turner's works. When he returned to France, after the disturbances were over, Monet didn't go back to the house in Saint-Michel. He moved to Argenteuil, where this work was painted, and you may perhaps pick up intimations of Turner and perhaps also of Whistler, because although Monet never went in for fancy titles, this is surely a symphony in white, as is the related painting here, done from the same vantage point, with its spot-on notation, everything integrating with seeming effortlessness into a luminous aggregate. And a detail of his astonishingly deft notation. It's around this time, 1871, 1872, that Cézanne definitively enters the Impressionist circle. Once the war and its aftermath, the Paris Commune, were over, Pissarro moved back to his house in Louveciennes. Renoir could come and go, as he pleased from his parents' place, and in the meantime, Alfred Sisley had moved into the neighborhood, eventually outstaying all the others. The same kinds of overlaps and interchanges with other artists in the group continued to nourish Sisley's works throughout this period. In 1871, Pissarro painted a relatively large landscape intended to go to the Salon. The motif no longer exists. It's all been built out. But you'll notice the landmark of the aqueduct on the right, and you can match up the view with these antique postcards, photographed perhaps 20 years afterwards. Evidently, this painting wasn't accepted by the Salon, but Cézanne did a copy of it. In 1872, it's thought, while Pissarro was still in Louveciennes, or maybe after Pissarro and his family had moved to Pontoise. And on the lower right, here is a painting that Sisley did of this same motif in 1873. I was trying to find a better image online of Pissarro's Louveciennes, but no luck there. I did come upon the following, which makes my point very neatly. Transformation of Cézanne's style through the Impressionism of Pissarro, and it summarizes the phenomenon I've been laboring to explain, that modernism developed through acts of exchange and discussion rather than through isolated enterprises. Here, well said. Well, we're in Paris now, and it's 1874, and things are going to come to a head. Given their history of knockbacks, awareness of the systemic prejudice against them, and the spirit of defiance born of their history of collaboration and interchange, Monet and Pissarro became co-organizers of an exhibition of independent artists. There were 165 works in the exhibition by 30 artists. They had invited Corot, Manet, Whistler, Fantin-Latour, and Rodin to exhibit alongside them, but all had declined the invitation, with one exception being Monet's mentor, Eugène Boudin, who had said yes. The exhibition went down in history as the first Impressionist exhibition. The exhibitors were quite disparate, but visitors could readily identify a core group. The critic Marc de Montifaut, which was a pseudonym for that rarest of creatures, a female art critic by the name of Marie-Émilie Chartroul, she or he described 6 or 7 daredevils recognizable by their works, all incomplete, which give off an imperious sense of truth. It was a backhanded compliment, but a compliment nonetheless. The exhibition was held here in the former studio of the famous Parisian photographer Nadar, on the 2 upper floors of the building on the Boulevard des Capucines, less than a 10-minute stroll from the Gare Saint-Lazare adjacent to the so-called Grand Boulevard. The view of this postcard is from the top floor balcony of Nadar's studio, and Monet would have been one floor down, as you can tell from the level of the treetops. One or both of these paintings were featured in the exhibition, implicitly inviting the gallery's viewers to match their perceptions of the activity in the street below with this amazing rendition, or these two amazing renditions. What the public was being solicited to judge was the veracity of the painting, or two paintings, to their immediate sense perceptions. But no, this wasn't going to work at all. The noblest subject of art, still upheld by the French Academy, was the human figure, idealized, of course, which was here reduced to an ant colony of pitiful, barbarous dribs and drabs. Given the fact that Monet, Pissarro, and their cohort had complete jurisdiction over what went into the first Impressionist exhibition, they included works they knew would be provocative, works they knew would never make it into a Salon exhibition, never, ever, ever. And critics and commentators certainly rose to their bait. There were three works, I gather, that were included as provocations, and these three were three works that were singled out. The fact that these works were deliberately placed and were so predictably targeted seems to indicate a deliberate strategy, although there are other historians who will no doubt disagree with me. The perennial impediment, the curse upon plein air paintings, which afflicted works by Turner, by Corot, by Whistler, as well, was the distinction held by the Academy between finished paintings and sketches. The art historian Albert Boehm has written about this, distinguishing between what he called the generative phase of painting and its executive phase. The generative phase associated with the primary invention of the image, the executive phase preoccupied with its finishing and polishing. The Impressionists, Monet and Cézanne, most notably, turned painting into a purely generative activity, reversing the priorities of the Academy, bringing to the fore, as Boehm put it, qualities that had been assigned to the preparatory sketch. The hallmark of Impressionist paintings in the eyes of its early viewers was the tash, the spot, patch, or blotch, which was recognized from the outset as the identifying feature. For example, Joris Karl Eastman, also a famous novelist, referred to Impressionism as a system of tash. And a teacher at the École des Beaux-Arts, Gustave de Boulanger, called Impressionism tashism, which he explained was a synonym for incompetence and laziness. So from its earliest appearance, the tash was generally held in suspicion as an ambiguous, potentially disruptive ally of representation, capable of fragmenting and alienating the motif beyond recognition. As I said, there were 3 brazen provocations planted, I think, deliberately in the first Impressionist exhibition by Monet, Pissarro, and Cézanne. So this is Monet's Impression Sunrise, which became the most notorious, most execrated work in the exhibition. Even wallpaper in its most embryonic state is more finished than that painting, the fictional interlocutor of the art critic Louis Leroy is supposed to have commented in a famous satirical review. Further on, in the same review, the character that Leroy invents, Monsieur Vincent, who was a kind of ventriloquist dummy to Leroy, engaged in an imaginary conversation, stopping in his tracks in front of Pissarro's ploughed field hoarfrost. I'll read you what the review says. It's very entertaining. Seeing this remarkable landscape, the gentleman thought that there was something wrong with his glasses. He cleaned them carefully, then put them back on his nose. By Michelin, he explained, what's that? You see a white frost over deeply ploughed furrows. Those furrows, that frost, they're palette scrapings applied to a dirty canvas. It has neither head nor tail, top nor bottom, foreground nor background. Perhaps, but the impression is there. Well, odd sort of impression. And all the rest was history, really. After the core members of this particular group of artists were satirically, disrespectfully called Impressionist, and the name stuck. The third and perhaps most extreme antagonist to critical orthodoxy at this time was Cézanne. Between 1872 and 1874, Cézanne had become Pissarro's regular painting companion. One of his paintings, The House of the Hanged Man, shown here, painted not too far away from where Pissarro lived, is also demonstrably close to Pissarro's style and sensibility, and is a bona fide Impressionist painting. Yet a second work by Cézanne was not at all like it, and could be the work of an entirely different artist. Critics came down on it like a ton of bricks. The painting was listed in the catalogue as a sketch, which was already a red flag, and its title was A Modern Olympia, referencing the work Monet exhibited in 1865, a work which was the scandal of the Salon in that year. Marie-Amélie Chartroul, who we referred to earlier, also known as Marc de Montifaux, thought that the painter of A Modern Olympia appears no more than a fool, painting in the throes of delirium tremens. The Sunday visitors to the exhibition, she wrote, judged it appropriate to snigger when confronted with the fantastic nude figure who is presented in an opiated sky to an opium smoker. They refused to see in this creation, inspired by Baudelaire, a dream, an impression created by oriental vapors, which had to be rendered as a bizarre sketch from the imagination. Isn't incoherence the nature, the particular character of laudanum slumber? While there's no evidence that Cézanne ever experimented with mind-altering drugs, Baudelaire was famous for doing so. However, Cézanne assumed no need for precaution here in dissuading viewers from what was, after all, an obvious surmise. The author of such an explosion of heightened color, of this paroxysmal vision of suddenly exposed, naked female flesh, of such fervid, impulsive scatterings of disconnected brushstrokes, he appeared to lack the means of mastering his sensations and coordinating his powers of expression, and to be out of touch with the everyday world, like someone under the influence of drugs. There was a third work by Cézanne in this exhibition, a landscape of Auvers-sur-Oise. We don't know which painting it was. My hunch has always gravitated towards this one. It is an excellent candidate because in it we see how Cézanne was going to individualize, to modify, to transform the language of Impressionism. Unlike the typically loose, comma-like touches and scattered little patches we find in paintings by Monet, Pissarro, Renoir, and Sisley, which they multiply into diffuse swarms, Cézanne has set out to discipline his brushwork. The relative disorder of the tangle of colored marks in the left foreground, with its slightly garbled spatial prospect, faces into the strikingly clear articulation of the rest of the painting. The crisp lozenges of the rooftops and the coordinated angling of the brushstrokes in the middle ground and background, where brushstrokes have been purposely oriented to the horizontal, vertical, and diagonal, these are signs of things to come. The crash course in Impressionist painting that Cézanne received during his 2-year association with Pissarro bore momentous results, which we'll be investigating in subsequent lectures in this series. And so to conclude, I'd like to read to you a reminiscence written by Pissarro's eldest son, Lucien, a letter he wrote to his youngest brother, Paul-Émile, recounting what Lucien had overheard when Cézanne and his father had been inseparable painting buddies in the 1870s. It gives us a wonderful idea of their complicity and of the kinds of exchange that were so important for the painters of this group. At the time, Cézanne lived in Auvers, near Pontoise, and every day he walked the 3 kilometers to come and work with Papa. He had endless theories. I remember one day they had special palette knives sent from Paris in order to make palette knife studies. As usual, they didn't continue painting with palette knives for long and tried using a divided touch. I think this was the first time when Cézanne began to paint with his vertical divisions, and Papa adopted long brushes and painted in tiny little commas. To say who influenced whom is impossible. An amateur painter from Pontoise often came to see them, and there were endless discussions. I remember a phrase which assumes great significance today. But Mr. So-and-so, We don't paint a figure. But Mr. So-and-so, we don't paint a figure. We make accords. Thank you for your interest. See you again.